Subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
This is our fourth plenary session. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed your tea break. And I am going to briefly introduce our four learned speakers. Mr. Garth Popple is the Deputy President of the World Federation of Therapeutic Communities. He is also the Executive Director of WHOS, which is a preeminent organization in Australia, one of the largest therapeutic community programs in Australia, and, by my estimation, one of the best in the world. And he will tell you all about essential elements. He will be followed by Martin Infante, who's the third Vice President of the World Federation, and also the Chief Executive of SELF in the Philippines. Quite a unique program. Has a wonderful element of dance and music that contributes to the well-being of the therapeutic community. And of course, not least, is Steve Verma, who is the Vice President of Treatment Communities of America, a good friend of mine who comes from New York, a wonderful program called Staying Out. They do extraordinary work, originally starting in the prison system, but branching out into reentry and community reentry and prison to community, and now prison community to community, and so on and so forth. These gentlemen have a lot to say about essential elements of therapeutic community programs, and so I'd like you to give them a really warm therapeutic community style welcome. Take it away, guys.
Namaskaram. Good morning, everybody. I'll just get this up to the height I think it should probably be at. As Sushma said, we've got therapeutic communities in Australia. So the therapeutic community that I work for was established in 1972. And as it says there, it helps drug users to help themselves. And I think that's a key point, because when people call our clients patients, or our residents patients, I'm very quick to say we don't have patients, we have people that help themselves. Now, we've just celebrated our 50 years of operating as a therapeutic community in Australia. The first day we had all the health professionals along, which is another word for our funders, and they came along to celebrate our 50 years of operating as a therapeutic community. On the second day, I wonder if everybody could turn their mobile phones off, please, or put it on silent. We had our ex-residents come along to celebrate, and we had a big party on our campus in Sydney, and we had about 450 to 500 people that were prior residents, prior clients of our service, come along and celebrate. And it was fantastic to see people turn up with their babies, and people have had their children given back to them since getting into recovery. And for me, seeing that is the reason why I work in the field that I work in, because I see people getting well. So I've got 7 therapeutic communities. We've got New Beginnings, which is a women's only service. Gunya, which is an Aboriginal name for shelter away from home, is our men's service. O-Star, which is opioid treatment program, which is for people who are withdrawing off their opioid treatment. The next one is R-TOD. This is a very bit different from a lot of therapeutic communities. People are on their opioid medication, and their treatment goal is stabilisation. It's not abstinence. So their treatment goal is stabilisation. And the other ones underneath, we've got 3 regional services, and these services are out in the countryside. All our other services are in the metropolitan Sydney. And we also have day programs attached to all our therapeutic programs. And our day program is about pre-assessment and post-treatment. So they've got them in a holding pattern, waiting till they come in, and when they leave, they've got access to aftercare when they leave. So this picture is an aerial shot of our Sydney campus. This is out in a rural area. This is about 4 or 5 k's from the centre of Sydney, so it's right in the middle. The actual site there was a lunatic asylum in 1820. And back in the 1900s, they turned it into a hospital for returned veterans from the First World War. And this is for people that were suffering from the mental health effects of war and shell shock. And our Commonwealth of Australia ran that hospital up until mid-60s, and then it became a mental health hospital. And then at one stage, lucky for us, the health department felt the hospital didn't make compliance anymore as far as standards, and they put it up, and we lobbied to get it for our therapeutic community, and we just love it there. Just a few of our other centres, that's Mandala House, and being a local culture here, you know what Mandala means, and that's a house down in the rural district. That's up in the Hunter Valley, which is another regional service, and that's up in the Sunshine Coast, Queensland. So most of our therapeutic communities have got down to 30 to 40 numbers of people at a time. In the old days, when we were back in the 70s, our therapeutic communities were in very large premises with hundreds of people, and lots of level structure. These days, the 30 or 40 people in a community is just one community. So our program, you know, when we started in 1972, our program was like about 18 months long. And we had to start looking at how long does someone actually have to be in treatment. You know, people were staying in treatment and becoming very isolated within a community, and when they left, they felt that they were in a foreign place going back into society. So we decided to shorten our program, make the therapeutic community 90 days with a re-entry stage at 120 mark, and then after that people go into our halfway houses. So people actually stay longer in our halfway house or aftercare system than they do in the therapeutic community. So the stages in our program, we've had, as you can see there's 4 main stages while they're still in the therapeutic community. And I guess you could say a rule of thumb is each stage is about 30 days. And when they get to transition, they're now looking for work or education. And when they get to aftercare, they're actually living out in the community. That's our model. As you can see there, the peer group and networks and staff all influence the person's recovery program. And those, and because my eyes can't pick up that on the screen, I'm going to go to my iPad. The main therapeutic community is made up of group work, harm reduction, stress management, peer support, individual counselling, referral liaison, gender focused activities, and family focused activities. And this all puts them down in a good position of having improved outcomes. What we did in Australia, rather than each individual therapeutic community have its own training program, all the therapeutic communities in Australia have joined a peak association, just like the World Federation, but at a local level. And what we did, when we first started looking for funding, the government said, there's a lot of people calling themselves therapeutic communities. And then they said, what is a therapeutic community? So we started the process of actually defining what a therapeutic community was. The government actually funded that research, and we found the thing from America called the SEEK, which is all about essential elements. And after we actually could define what a therapeutic community was, they said, well, how can we have confidence that people are actually going to apply these essential elements to a model? So then we started developing standards, as Oriel was saying this morning. We developed standards, and then we got an external accreditation body to evaluate our standards, and eventually now in Australia the therapeutic community movement is an accredited body within Australia. So when the government now says we want to fund a residential service, we have marketed the situation that if you fund a therapeutic community, you know what you're funding, and it's a gold standard. If you're a residential service, what does that mean? What actually happens in a residential service? And I think in Australia, as I said, the government feels more confident in funding something that is a member of our association and it is accredited. The ATCA recognised the need for a special TC training. If you're running a naval academy and all your people become qualified officers, they go to all this effort to get their diploma or whatever. When you come to a therapeutic community, it was like bringing him onto a pirate ship. No one was listening to what you were saying. People did everything completely different than a hospital ward. So we found there was a huge need to actually retrain people, no matter whether they're nurses, social workers, psychologists, it didn't matter. We had to retrain people what a therapeutic community was. And we also found out people were doing the process of a therapeutic community, but they didn't actually know why they were doing it. So we had to develop the rationale. So you might say we started developing the evidence in arrears. We were doing all these things from the early 70s, and the funders didn't know why we did what we did. So we had to actually go out and look for the evidence why we were doing it, building the rationale in, and then start putting it into our standards. So the first ATCA, TCA training courses were delivered in 2017. So it's only a recent event. And the first Australian TC training course was held at my organisation, WHOS in Sydney, and 34 people were put through the process. And up to date, we've had 500 TC staff trained in the therapeutic community model, and they actually get a diploma for finishing the course. Now, the other good thing about having a peak organisation with the training is that people can leave my service and go to Odyssey, or they can leave Odyssey and go to the Salvation Army, or they can move all around the therapeutic communities in Australia and carry the same qualification of therapeutic community training. And in that is the course covers overview of a therapeutic community as method, and if you haven't got the book, you should get that book by George de Leon, and he's also got DVDs which we show the residents. The TC structure, because we know how much structure can alternate between countries and states. The organisation and environment, again what Oriel was talking about this morning, staff roles, group work, the tools we use in TCs, chores and job functions, which we now call chores, and continuing care, aftercare and supervised practitioner and learning by experience. So the modules are split up. I won't go into too much detail here, but the modules are split up. The course orientation, the overview of the therapeutic community. Module 2 is about the community as method, and Module 3 is TC structure, organisation and environment. Module 4 is about healthy relationships in the therapeutic community, and focusing on understanding relationships in the TC. Module 5 is about staff roles and responsibilities and rational authority. And Module 5 is group work, community tools, job functions as therapy and continuous care. And I just might say here is we got down TC training and e-learning, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, as part of a job description and letter of offer when people come to work for us. They can't just come to us and do an e-learning course when they like. They have to complete modules each month. It doesn't matter if you're a new or an old staff member, meaning in time of duration of experience, you have to do it to stay relevant. Now, that's just an outline of how much time we spend on each module. What we did, and I know Dick's got an incredible e-learning program, we decided to invest in e-learning because no one else was doing it in Australia, because we thought, how can we actually measure someone's comprehension of the therapeutic community model? because the famous words, when someone works for you and you have to have a work performance matter with them about maybe their performance around confidentiality or privacy, they say, oh, we didn't know that policy. No one told us about that policy. So now our policies, what we call our mandatory policies and our essential policies, are signed off electronically, and when they pass the test on the e-learning module, it goes up into their human resource file, so people actually can demonstrate what they've learnt and their comprehension of it. And if they ever came back and said, well, we didn't know that, we say, well, hang on, you've learnt it, you've signed off it, and your HR file actually says you've been signed off on it. We had to do that because we were getting people saying we didn't know that. Bit busy for this session here, but it's a bit of an overview. I'll probably use you on the big screen. A bit of an overview of our e-learning system. By the way, any of these slides you would like, I'm happy to let you have copies of these slides. They're just the manuals we've developed for each module. Working in a therapeutic community, this particular course has been designed to provide staff with the introduction to both the philosophical and background of the practical way in which to work with the therapeutic community at WHOS. The training courses ensures that WHOS staff understand therapeutic community philosophy, which underpins the treatment and intervention offered within WHOS services. That is the rationale for what we do, because as I said a bit earlier, in a lot of TCs, people are just doing things parrot fashion, but not actually understanding why they do what they do. Provides a link between the individual treatment processes and rules, provides that the clarity and understanding of the foundation of the TC approach, and helps staff always act responsibly within the TC approach, and helps provide the predictable and safe environment that consistently reinforces WHOS and TC principles. Because one of the things we found out is because we have a lot of people coming from other disciplines, we found out if you're not careful, the foundation of the therapeutic community model starts getting diminished. People start bringing in things, this particular thing from this discipline, this particular thing from another discipline, where that's fine, but what we've got to make sure of things like peer group dynamics don't get withered away in place of other new age kind of treatments, things that actually makes TCs work. The thing that actually makes 500 people come to our reunion, the bonding that people felt in the therapeutic community, the reason why it means something to them to come back. I mean, you don't go to a hospital and get your appendix out or something else taken out and come back for a reunion, do you? There's no bonding there. You haven't been there long enough to share. And it's that sharing of one another and going through that journey of recovery is building those bonds, and that's what people remember. WHOS TC training is a staged training course. The first stage is for staff who have just started at WHOS. Stage 2 is for staff that have been at WHOS for 6 months to 3 years. And stage 3 for staff who have worked in treatment for more than 3 years. Now, why do we do that? I found out that even though I've had seasoned managers working for a long, long time, refreshers are always necessary. And you heard Faden talk this morning about telling you once, telling you again, and the third time telling you why I told you. We have to keep reinforcing the therapeutic community model, no matter how long you've been there. Now, an example of WHOS TC training module, evidence that supports the therapeutic community approach, philosophy that underpins the WHOS TC, peer-supported learning, which is another word for community as method, and social learning theory, and the ATCA TC standards, and the ATCA essential elements. Now, we've brought the elements and the standards right back to people's job description. We found it has to be completely integrated for our whole system. Now, how a TC operates, this includes topics such as peer group dynamics, TC environment, program guidelines, program content, and monitoring client progress. TC training summary. Now, It provides the organisation and its staff a consistent, easy, understood and accessible orientation and training for new and existing staff. Our e-learning program allows for updates and new information to be added. We're adding a new update recently for Aboriginal. We're getting a lot more Indigenous First Nation people coming into our service because we hired some Aboriginal staff specifically to talk to Indigenous First Nation clients. So we found the need to put an e-learning not for them but for the non-Indigenous clients to understand why we have to be a bit more patient, why culture is so important, why family and culture, which they call MOB, is so important. So we're kind of orientating a lot more about diversity these days. Also staff to move through the e-learning at their own pace, and also support from more experienced staff if needed. Now, WHOS e-learning is based on TC training approach and has resulted in an increase in the competence and the confidence of staff, and in particular new staff as they take their place in a TC. And it's interesting, when we had nurses come into our service, especially when we dose our methadone and buprenorphine in-house, bringing in a discipline that wasn't familiar with the TC model was incredibly challenging. And we found out it took probably a couple of years for people to understand that, you know, when someone says, can I do this or can I do that? If a client says to me, can I do this or can I do that? I've only got one answer, and it's always the same answer. What do you peers think? What do your peers think? What do your peers think? Because when you leave, we're not going to be here. So it's important that you build a very solid peer group after you leave, and you start communicating with that peer group to get your advice. Because if you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and you're the biggest thing you think that's got on offer, you're in trouble. So I can encourage anyone who hasn't explored e-learning. It's a great way to get people on a regular updated process about the TC model. And also, because someone has been working in there for a long time doesn't mean they know everything. We've got to keep going back and relearning and resisting the need to bring in too much new stuff into a program and alter the very foundation of what makes it work. So I'll leave it there, and Martin, it's your turn.